amongst many of the things I do, which is probably one of the reasons why I'm here, is that I am a brilliantly titled professor at Manchester, and I do that very part-time nowadays because I run my own business. But when I first got my chair at Manchester, world top 50 university, and I was incredibly smug about it. And I went home to see my mum, as you do at these moments. And I said, Mum, I've got a chair at Manchester University. And she just looked at me and said, chair in what? And I said, I'm got the chair in creativity and leadership. And she took a breath. She said, sounds like professor of bullshit to me. So you've got an hour and a half with the university's professor of bullshit, and I'm sure you'll discover I'm very good at it. So we'll go from here. Showing up. I had a boss. I wrote this because I tried to, how do you sum up what this is about? And I had a boss who said to me a long time ago, leadership is a contact sport. And that's quite a nice analogy, not quite if you're a British Lions supporter at the moment, but it actually reminds you that actually if it's a contact sport, you don't just have to be present. There's something much more. There's something more visceral. There's something more personal to the way you're going to go about doing what you have to do in order to become effective. And a long time ago now, in 2011, I wrote a book called The Cult of the Leader. And it got a load of accolades and so on, which was terrific. But one of the things it did was it explored why the world's financial system managed to be led into near collapse by a generation of leaders who'd clearly forgotten about who they were showing up for. And I called them the L'Oreal generation. These are the people who were worth it. They showed up for themselves, and they didn't show up for anybody else. And one of my observations about it was somehow, as a set of societies, not just in the West, but far more broadly, we created a generation of people in organisations, and don't think the public sector is exempt from that. It happened in public sector organisations of which I've sat on the board as much as private sector ones, and it happened in charities. We created a generation of people who felt that somehow they were in the position of being the leaders through some version of divine right. And this was very much driven by the thinking that was put out by McKinsey in the mid to late 90s by something they described called the war on talent. And this whole concept about having a very small number, a finite number of people who somehow was so superb that you had to pay them what they wanted to be paid, and you had to let them behave in the way they wanted to behave, and you had to let them do what they wanted to do, regardless of the impact on stakeholders, their shareholders, their customers, the public at large, had an extraordinary impact on the world of leadership in the late 20th century and early beginnings of the 21st century. And if I give you one statistic, which I found fascinating, between the years 1997 and 2008, if you looked at and divided our country into deciles and 10% of wealth, the richest 10% saw their incomes increase by 40%. And the poorest 10% saw no increase whatsoever. It's extraordinary. Under a government that said it was going to set out to redefine the social contract, that put in, by the way, the doubled public expenditure over the same period to try and support and build more equality in society and greater social mobility. So what on earth happens in a society, in private, public and third sector organisations, that sees such an injection of funds into the organisations into which many of you were in over a very long period of time, sees the economy grow quite significantly over that period, and somehow fails in its duty to the overall benefit of society as a whole. And actually, you can put that down to leadership. And I want to sort of explore what that means and what leadership could and should look like if over the next 10 years, we're not going to do precisely the same thing, that we're going to come out with something different and hopefully better. So one of the things that I noted in thinking about what happens to create this leadership generation that became so incredibly selfish and self-centered. And I'll share two thoughts with you. The first is that practically perfect only ever comes in books. But it's really interesting, isn't it, how we've all adopted systems of performance appraisal and management and recognition, regardless of sector, that somehow encourages all of us to believe we're perfect. So I don't know what sort of appraisal systems you have, but at some point you'll come across a list of things that the organisation would like you to be good at, whether they're called behaviours, capabilities, whatever you come to. And there are two columns, aren't there? There are things that we call strengths, and there's another one we call development needs, which to you and me is a weakness. And the problem is, what all of us are encouraged to do, because it's how the system works, is that we try and make sure we've got every strength down, particularly the ones we know that will lead to us getting the next job. And when we come to development needs, we permit ourselves only to have things that can be interpreted as strengths, like doesn't bear fools gladly, or versions of that. Now, if the whole of the system we're building people's careers and developing capabilities is not about putting your hand up saying, actually, I'm pretty shit at that, and I'm not going to get hugely better, but I've got other people in the team I work with who make me really good at that stuff. If we're not going to have that conversation, but somehow we're going to drive to some measure of HR nirvana, then why do we expect leaders to behave any differently? Because by having those types of systems in our organisations today, we're encouraging people to think they can be practically perfect. They can't. That's not correct. Everyone's got things they're good at and things they're not good at. But by building this picture of practically perfect, what we're doing is we're creating a very old-fashioned model of leadership. You know, one where to save the world you put your underpants on. We're back with pants again, Tracy. You put your underpants on over your trousers and you go off and say, well, it's not a very good look, really. Follow me. That's not what we're about. And I want to explore why this sort of underpant-led thinking is not where we need to be in the 21st century. Presumably, you want to deliver better public services with better outcomes. That's what I hope you do as someone who enthusiastically pays my taxes towards you doing it well. So if that's what you want to do, what does it take in today's world to do that well? So let's have a think about this. What I'd like you to do is read these two statements. And then round the table, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to talk about them. Which one appeals to you and why? And at the end of the 5 minutes, we're going to have a vote, and we're going to decide which one we agree with the most. You got 5 minutes. Have a conversation. Okay, so are you ready to vote? Yeah? Right. Okay, guys, let's go. Does that surprise you? No? Yes?
I'm surprised 28% went for one.
Okay. That's a good point. Okay, say a bit more.
Sorry?
Why are you surprised they went for 1? Okay. All right. So let's hear from someone who went for vision. Just tell us why you chose to go with 1. There is no right answer, by the way. It's just an interesting conversation. So you think you went for it because you think the values were clear. We now need the vision. Okay, that's an interesting. So you'd be more happy. You're less surprised now. Okay. Take a look at this poster. I want to know how attractive these values are to you. I'm going to give you another vote. Just in case you can't read the poster, it says respect. We treat others as we would like to be treated ourselves. We do not tolerate abuse or disrespectful treatment. Ruthlessness, callousness, and arrogance don't belong here. One says communication. We have an obligation to communicate. Here we take the time to talk with one another and to listen. Integrity, we work with customers and prospects. Openly, honestly, and sincerely. And excellence, we are committed to nothing less than the very best in everything we do. So you get the idea. Okay, so you've registered those. So let's go to our next vote. So 1 is least, they're really not attracted to me at all. And 10 is, yeah, they're absolutely fantastic values. Okay, so we have a bias towards liking them. Would you like to know whose values they were? They were Enron's values. So it begs a question, doesn't it? So great poster, shame about the implementation. So where do we go? Can we go back to the slides? So where do we go? Let me just throw this at you, and we'll come back to this towards the end. A value is only a value if it's a belief that is so important to you that it shapes the decisions that you make day to day. That's a value. It's not a word you put on the wall. And one of the things about values in organisations is that they sometimes come adrift from the values in people. Go back to my L'Oreal generation. What did the people who ran the banks and other financial services and regulated them and bought into the investment funds, what did they really value for themselves as opposed to what they said their organisations valued? And how can you, as organisation leaders, enable, support and develop people in your organisation so that their behaviour is congruent with what you want to achieve for the organisation as a whole? Because clearly you are bumping into some quite big things, which is people's belief systems and what motivates them. We're not really talking about whether they're nice to each other. We're talking about fundamentally whether they value other people or they don't, for example. So what I'd like to do is to explore what the challenge is behind doing that. Because, whether you voted for 1 or for 2, you clearly believe that values are a critical and probably a defining part of leadership. Particularly they are because they define how people consume your leadership. They'll make a judgment about your values much more quickly and much more viscerally than your vision. And in fact, when the vision goes wrong and things go bad and trouble happens, people will stick with you longer because of your values than they will because of the vision. So why is that so difficult to get right in organisations? How can you end up with the sort of mess that we saw in 2008, 2009? So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to introduce you to a couple of sort of leadership case studies. And the first case study I'm going to introduce you to is for a leadership team meeting. And the leader is called Reg. And Reg is the leader of the People's Liberation Front for Judea in AD 30. And he's talking to his team about the importance of overthrowing Roman rule. So what I'd like to know is, what happens to Reg? John Cleese from The Wonderful Life of Brian. So, what did you notice? What happened to Reg? He lost it. How did he lose it?
He lost the people.
He lost the people. Okay. In what way did he lose it? What was behind that? What's your guess about why they diverged so dramatically? Well, he asked the wrong question. Say a bit more. Okay, so he might have been too rhetorical. But what was interesting about their answers and his answers? What do you think about? You know, if I think I'm going to get a load of they've done this to us and that to us and put us in prison and so on and so forth, and I don't, I get a whole load of positives. What does that say to you as a leader? Well, they place value on the good things, but also that they've got a load of other facts, potentially, that you don't have. So what's really interesting about modern leadership, and I find this in my own very small business, is you can confidently say something as the leader, and within about 2 minutes, someone's given you the equivalent of the aqueduct, and you go, oh, shit. Oh, God. Now, you can deal with it one of two ways, can't you? You can just go, I'm the leader. That's why I have my view. Or you could do something else. And that's what's interesting about the assumed question. To your point, wrong question. Actually, it was probably wrong to ask a question like that, where you think you know the answer. So, why is this aqueduct problem becoming more of an issue in leadership than it was, say, when I started work back in the Stone Age? Well, let's explore what's happening to the pace of change in our world today, and we're going to do that over the last 100 years or so. So, this is the year 1900, 1918, 1945, 1960. Now, what I'd like to do first is to ask you to think about what's happened to the rate of the pace of change. So, define my terms. The pace of change is driven by some significant things. Population growth. The shift in population from agrarian to urban lives, rural to urban lives. Growth of patents. The growth of communication links. So over this period we're talking railroads, shipping, to aircraft, to interplanetary travel. The growth in technology. So things like that. So because I'm a professor, I happen to know that in 1900, the rate of the pace of change was here. What I'd like you to do is graph where it is today and the journey it's made. So we're going to do it in this way. I'm going to move the pen this way, and you're going to go higher, lower. All right? You ready? Okay. You're so smart. You've even done the x minus y regression smooth the curve job for me, which is very good. So, what we're sort of saying is, from towards the mid-90s onwards, the rate of the pace of change started to accelerate away from us quite dramatically. Now, one can make a big guess at that, can't we, which is the impact and the rise of digital technology on our lives, primarily. Now, that's sort of interesting, and we can have a co-counselling session of what it's like to have 480 emails in the morning and be shouted at by someone for not answering the 420th by 8:35, but that's not really going to help. What's going to help is to put this in the context of something else. What has happened over the same period of time to the ability of an organisation to learn? Now, an organisation isn't a thing, is it? It's actually made up of all of us. So what I'm really asking you is what's happened over time to the progress, if you like, of a human being's ability to learn, so to absorb information and apply it. Now, because I'm a professor, I happen to know a professor of neuroscience, and she tells me that in 1900, the ability of a human being to learn was here. In other words, stuff happened, and it happened at such a pace that we were able to process it, probably write the book about it, and then learn from the book and practice from other people, perhaps over some generations, before something changed again to make new knowledge a requirement. So, I'm moving the pen, you're going higher, lower. I've got same and lower. Actually, what happens is it sort of does that slightly. Because clearly digital technology helps us process information faster just as much as it's driving change in society. But round about here, the turn of the millennium, maybe just afterwards, the world started to change faster than we can learn. That has monumental implications. Not just for my colleagues at Manchester who will have to stop teaching the same case they've taught for 25 years, but actually far more seriously for you as leaders. Let's go back to the Stone Age when I started work. I joined Shell in 1982 as a graduate. And in Shell, if I wanted to find the answer to something, I went and found someone who had carpet in their office. And if he, and it always was a he, I'm afraid to say, didn't know the answer, then we went to find someone in whose office the carpet touched the walls. And if they didn't know the answer, then we went to the biggest office of all, where the carpet was so thick it stroked your ankles. And at that point you knew you were in the presence of the answer. Now, you were, because if you remember, in this world, where you could learn faster than the change, what drove power? What was power in the 1980s and 90s? Knowledge. It's what you knew. Knowledge was power. In this world, what you know is possibly, and in some fields probably, no longer relevant. So as leaders, I'm now going to give you a break. Here's the break. You no longer have to know the answer. Relax. Take the shoulders down. What you have to know is how to get to the answer. How you put the right resources at the right time into the right place to come up with the solutions that you need to take your organisations forward. That is the single biggest shift in leadership over the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. So how do you do that? Because if you think about it, Reg's problem was very straightforward. There was no shared understanding of the facts. Bless you. What you have to think about as a leader, particularly in your worlds, particularly in my world, is that the chances are there are people around you probably much more junior, probably far closer to the end consumer or customer, who will know something that's really, really critical to you solving a problem effectively. And what's really interesting about the workforce you employ, particularly and public services, but it's true in most of the private and third sector as well, is this is now one of the most educated workforces we've ever had in this country. So what's interesting is you're employing lots and lots of people in probably some quite junior jobs who think they're just as smart as you, think they've got just as much to add, and would like the opportunity to make the contribution. And because it's no longer your job to have the answer, you shouldn't see that as a threat. You should see that as the biggest opportunity you've been given to make the biggest impact in the organisation and for public service delivery generally that you've ever had. So how might you do that? So the model is quite straightforward. When you're not sure, start with data. I don't mean your PowerPoint interpretation of the data, I mean the raw data. And that's really important, because if you start with a bias in any assessment of anything, the chances are the outcome could be biased. So however much you trust the person who's put the PowerPoint up, ask for the raw data. Because you just might see something in it, or someone else might see something in it from their experience that you don't have. And what you do with data is you ask great questions about it. And your point about the question is a really important one here. The best question to ask in change is, what would happen if? And you look at data and you think about that in two ways. What would happen if that trend continues? What would happen if we can't keep our costs under control, and they go faster than our income, and so on and so forth? But also, what would happen if we did that differently? What would happen if we did this? What would happen to those numbers? And you can see the ability for innovation and ideas and people's experience to come in. And what you're doing as the leader is you're managing the process of what would happen. You're not worrying, particularly at this stage, about the outcome. I'll get to the outcome in a minute. The thing about what would happen if this continues type of questions of the data is, what it does, it establishes the issue. Now, if we have a bit of an honesty session, so remember, I'm not looking at your development needs here, I'm looking at your weaknesses. How many of you have taken work away from people in the last year and said, oh, I'll do that? Come on, hands up. Yes, we all do it. Now, I'm going to put an idea out there. Is the reason you did that is you weren't confident that they really understood the issue. It wasn't they'd done bad work, but what you're saying to yourself is, I'm not entirely sure you're going to get to where we need to get to. Now, if you think about the world changing fast, you taking over and defining the issue is potentially fatal. Because you may be so far away from the problem, you're not going to be right. So resist the temptation to do that. Set the work and then take it back. Actually, invest the time, because by the way, that then takes time to do all the rework. Invest the time in doing the data and the questions so we all understand what the issue is. And when we all agree we've got a problem and the problem is called X, then you can build solutions. Now, you did a load of stuff on engagement earlier. The interesting thing about empowering people to do things and having engaged organisations is that they get to do it, you don't. And in this process of data, question, issue, build, your job as the leader in the world that's changing faster than we can learn is to set criteria against which success will be judged for the new solution. So you as a leader do know three things, I suspect, at any time. You know how much time you've got before you've got to solve the problem. You know how many people you have that you might be able to put on the problem. And you know how much the solution can cost, or how little it can cost. Your job, increasingly, I think, is to make sure that organisations and teams are working on the right issues and they understand the criteria for successful solution. And if you're managing that time in and day out, what you're managing is a hugely positive process for engaging people in change. But you're also avoiding the trap of thinking you know the answer. Your job is to know how to get to the answer, not how to solve the problem. So, next thought. If you're moving people, so I think leadership, I absolutely buy this, it's both. So you great values, but the other thing in leadership is you're going from A to B. We're going somewhere. That's the vision bit. Think about how people change. So how many of you have come across the grief curve and change? Yes? Good. Throw it in the bin. It's absolutely, I think, one of the most useless things that you could possibly engage in terms of thinking about how you get organisations from A to B. It's very useful in dealing with individual experiences around grief, but it's really not very helpful when you think about organisations. This is something that was written by a guy called William Bridges. It was written about 30 years ago. It's a book called Managing Transitions. And if you're interested in change and transition, then it's worth, you can download it on your Kindle. It is absolutely worth spending the, whatever it is, 10 quid to get it. Partly because it's a great dipper into, I wonder if there's something I can do that helps me with this. But what Bridges does is he stops talking about change and he talks about transitions. And we go to my world where the world is changing faster you can learn. And the problem is for you, particularly those of you who are further from retirement than I am, is your life is going to be spent managing transitions. There will not be a steady state anymore. So how are you going to do this in sort of waves? And how do you sustain yourself through that process? So what Bridges argues is, let's talk about this as a pitch of an individual at the minute. I've just said, hello, Tracy, isn't it great to meet you? I'm just about to change your organisation. And so Tracy, straight away, is in three minds. She has many more than those, but she's in three as far as this conversation is concerned. The first one is, she spent the first 30 seconds hearing about the new. Then she stopped thinking about it. The next thing she's thinking about is, hang on, Chris, you've just told me that in public in front of 130 odd people. Why haven't I had a chance to build this solution with you? Because I report to you, don't I? So she's also thinking, won't be wearing my best pants again. So she's disengaging from that, from me and from the future. But actually what she's thinking about most of the time, that I've continued to rattle on about the new and how exciting it is what she's losing. What she has to let go. Does that mean people are going to lose their jobs? Are my friends going to go? What do you mean? Am I not going to be called this anymore? It's amazing what people think about in the middle of a conversation when you're talking about your exciting new vision for the future. And they ain't thinking about you. Your job as a leader is somehow to get them through over to this side, where most of them's thinking about the new most of the time. A little bit is still thinking about, I'm still not sure I'm going to get my best knickers out just yet. And a little bit of them's thinking about, because there always is when something changes, we always regret something. There are things I think about now that I thought were hugely positive parts of the workplace that no longer exist. And they're just sort of old-fashioned things, but they were remarkable in their time. And you think, well, I'll miss that really. So, but that's where most of us are when we've got through a transition. And then, crikey, we're going to start again. What you try to do here is avoid them being in the neutral zone and not be productive. Very quickly, I will let go of the old. Most people. Some people will stay in it forever. Very quickly, I will let go of the old. But I will not embrace the new immediately. I'm probably going to be neither excited by the new nor bothered about the old. And at that moment, I can disengage. And I will do it mentally first, and then I will do it physically. If I'm any good, I'll probably have gone and found another job. That is a very dangerous moment for organisations. It's particularly true, I think, in the public service, particularly when some of the levers open to your private sector counterparts are not open to you. And I think at this stage, you really have to have smart plans for what we do with people to help them get through to the future. And the smartest thing you can do is start your description of the future with, I know where we're going, broadly, but I don't know how to implement it. I don't know how to make it come true, and I absolutely need your help to build it. And you need to get as many people into that data, question, issue, build routine as you possibly can. Because if I'm engaged in building the future, it's my future. If you give it to me in a beautifully written 100-page HR change manual with everything sorted out for me in advance, it's absolutely not my future. When you go into a new office, who do you leave to design the office? The people who work in it all the time. Don't design it yourself. It's exactly the same for the futures you're thinking about in public service today. You have to find constructive and positive ways that people can contribute so it's their future. And the chances are you'll actually get a better outcome because they collectively know more than you do. Transition. Now, the interesting thing about transition is what you worry about. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you probably, actually I'm not going to give you 10 minutes, I'm going to give you about 5 or 6. What I'd like you to do is get a pen and a piece of paper in front of you, and I'd like you to write out all the things you think you're involved in or have been involved in over the last 2 months. All the activities. It doesn't matter how big or small they are, whatever they are. And I think, the things that have taken up a lot of your time. So just write a list. Start writing, it'll all come to you. Don't worry about it, just get a list down. Because in a minute, what I'm going to get you to do is when you finish the list, I'd like you to then think about those activities in one of these 4 boxes. This is my model for managing leadership risk. And what do I mean by leadership risk? Is the problem for most leaders is the thing you need to focus on most, the important thing, is forever being overwhelmed by the urgent. Yeah? But actually, chances are, and in my experience in 3 sectors, has been that the urgent is coming about because I'm not doing the important. That's a difficult one to swallow. So what do I mean by that? One of the things that's interesting about activity, and I'll talk about business, you'll talk about the process of managing public sector organisations, is that broadly you do one of 4 things. You do stuff you've always done, and you do it in the way it's always been done. That's old product, old process. Or someone has a smart idea of bringing in an ERP back office system. That's a smart idea. And so you do what you've always done, but you're going to do it in a initially painfully new way. Sometimes someone produces something new you're going to do. So if you're in the health service, maybe obesity control surgery, which has only come in the last, someone tell me, 10 years? Something like that. So you've got a new product, But you've got an old process, so the way that you put people through the system and the way you assess them, all the rest of it, is exactly the same way as you do any other problem. Or you're going to do something new and you're going to do it in a new way. Now, what's really interesting is, as a leader, if you think about, I don't know the answer, and you think about, I'm going into this sort of grey and ambiguous world, where do you think you should be spending most of your attention? Where do you think your biggest leadership risk is? Up here. And where do you think you should just not be paying any attention at all? Down here. So take your list and just put it against what you think you're currently doing. Put it against this model. And take a look at it and then have a conversation around the table for a couple of minutes, because I want to know how confident you are once you've thought about this, whether you're allocating your time in the most effective way to deliver the thing you're really employed to deliver, which is the future. So what I'm interested in is in sort of how you conclude about your own sense of where you're putting your attention. So I have a voting question. So I am confident that I'm focusing on the right things to deliver the change that's required. So 10 is you're totally confident. You're focusing on all the right things. And 1 is, oh dear, I think I'm going to have a rethink. Either any of those answers are good. So just tell me where you are after that conversation and that bit of thinking. Quite interesting. So most of us think we might want to have a think. Some of us feel it might be not necessarily a very long think, and some of us feel they've got a lot of thinking to do. Why did I put that up there? I put it up there because I don't think as leaders, particularly in the pressures you're under in the public sector, that you ever get a lot of chance to reflect on what you're doing with your time. I mean, I watched my own very small team, and my head of digital was away for 2 weeks. So we build we help people sell a lot more through their websites. And we work for people like Financial Times, The Economist, M&Co, the National Trust, Virgin Active, all sorts of people. And Channel 4. So for Channel 4, because you don't buy anything, we help them get more people to view videos more often and more of them. So we do a lot of work online with people. And we've built this organisation and digital model. And most of the time I'm doing sort of stuff like this. So I covered paternity leave for 2 weeks. God, I'm glad he's back. I didn't have a minute to myself. Now, I'd sort of forgotten what that was like, but you will feel like that all the time. And one of the reasons I built the model that I built, can we put the slide back on, is because I wanted to get my business at whatever level, and however busy they were, to try and sort their way through these 4 things. Because this stuff we do brilliantly for people, and our customers love us. Where it's all going to go wrong and we're not going to grow our business is if we don't do that stuff well. And actually, if we then don't do that stuff well, because it's a new product, and then if we don't do that stuff well. So I have a sort of rule in my life that says if 60% of my time isn't up here, we're probably going to fail at something because we're not giving it the focus, the attention, and the support that we should be giving it. And if 60% of my time's down here, I'm clearly employing the wrong people. Because I employ people to do that. I don't need to do it myself. And it's not a bad thing to do once every 3 or 4 months. It's just to pull that bit of thinking together and say, where am I? Because we can get knocked off course very quickly. And because most of you have got good values, and all of you have got values, I don't mean most of you, because you've got good values, because you want to be there for your people, you will get knocked off course more often than you'd like to. Because you need to be there for people. So this isn't a bad way of thinking about how off course am I and do I need just to get myself back up into that top corner. Right, next piece. So I'm just going to come into this idea of you yourself, and we're back to values. This is Abraham Lincoln. That's a rather nice quotation. Why have I picked on that? There is a very big muddle between trust and confidence in public life. What do I mean by that? Most of us have been through the health service as patients, I suspect. I have spent many happy hours in the Oxford Radcliffe Hospital. And what is interesting, and the best way I've discovered to explain the difference between trust and confidence is you can have trust in your nurse or your doctor, but you don't ever trust the hospital. Now, why is that? Well, actually, I'm using the wrong word for the hospital. I should have total confidence in the hospital. Why am I saying that? Trust is something that happens between people. You can't give it to an organisation. You can't actually trust your car, even though we might say, oh, I trust my car, it's never broken down. What you mean is you have confidence in your car because it always starts, because you have it regularly serviced, because you always check the tyre pressure, you always put the oil in. I'm making a lot of you very unconfident in your car now, aren't I? And you always do the things you should do so that you've reduced the probability of failure. And in hospitals, actually, what great healthcare is about is you've reduced the probability of failure to infinitesimal. If I'm going to go in for this operation or that treatment, I am more than confident I will come out not only alive, but also better off than when I went in. That's what you want to do with any service. So trust is the wrong word, it's also the wrong concept. Trust is something I give you. I give it to you voluntarily. You don't get it if you ask for it. You only get it if I give it to you. Quite an important thing. It's the basis of belief. It's why people choose to believe in a God or don't. It's a choice by them. However passionate you feel about God, you can't impose it on somebody else. And however passionate people feel about something else, they can't impose it on you. It's a belief. It's the basis of relationships. Your partner, your children, your parents, your friends. When those people let you down, it's incredibly painful. It's not anger painful, it's hurt painful. And that, whether you ever put that trust back, is a huge decision. Once it's been broken on one occasion, will it get broken again? So if you say to a room of people in change, trust me, you are offering people the opportunity to build a relationship with you that you better be 120% confident you will deliver on. I'd always say, have confidence that we've put this program of change together to deliver this, this, and this. These are the systems we've put in place. These are the decisions we've made. And what we're hoping is that you'll buy into this because you'll be confident we've thought things through. The only people I might suggest trust me in this are the people who directly report to me, to whom I know I can absolutely take through this and they'll come out the other end better, bigger and stronger, or at least in one piece. Put your hand up if, when you get on the plane, you think you should trust the pilot. Okay, I'm just checking who you are because I won't be flying with any of you. You shouldn't trust the pilot. Do you know the pilot? No. What do you want to have? Confidence. You want to know that the bugger has been trained up to their eyeballs. Right? And they know how to get back as well as to get down as well as to get up. You know, these are things that are really important to you. But they're confidence. So as you go through these huge, really challenging years where we're thinking about transforming public service delivery and the impact of technology and everything, for goodness sake, do not stand up and tell people to trust you. Because the first small slip and you've lost the trust of 200 people in a room. And you will never get it back. Confidence and trust. So I'm coming into this whole area of stakeholder management, aren't I? And this is my next leadership case. So I have no idea how to set this up. How many of you watch Big Bang Theory? Okay, right. There's a number of people just looking blank and going, sorry. Big Bang Theory is a cult comedy from the United States, and the setup is very simple. A pair of complete technology geeks in one of the biggest research establishments on the west coast of America, set up flat in town, in and around LA, and next door moves in a very ordinary, I guess in intellectual terms, but not in physical terms, young woman moves next door. And the whole setup is clearly around what happens when the real world, Penny, meets the world of complete geekdom, Sheldon and Leonard. And we join them quite soon after Penny's moved in, where Sheldon and Leonard have decided to go into her apartment, her flat, while she's asleep and tidy it. Sheldon and Leonard, absolutely brilliant. So, stakeholders. This is something else I'm going to tell you to throw in the bin. You know, if you've ever done Prince 2 or anything like that, this is not, you're not going to like this, but there are only two things stakeholders can do. They can understand what you're doing, and they can support it. So let's think about those two things. So this is understanding, and this is support. So, of course, the people you're immediately attracted to, the people that you want to be with all the time, are here. These people understand what it is that you are doing, and they support what it is you're doing, and they are your champions. You like these people, don't you? You spend time with them. You talk to them, probably a lot. Why? Because they understand what it is you're doing, and they support you. So, you know, stop talking to them now. Send them a Christmas card, send them the occasional pizza, and that's it. So if I don't want you to talk to the people who support you, presumably I want you to talk to somebody else. So maybe it's these people over here. So they understand what it is you're trying to do, but they don't support you. So these are your opponents. Now, what do you do with opponents? Well, quite often you go back and have another conversation, don't you? Yeah. Why? They're not stupid. They understand what it is you're trying to do. They don't support you. And the operative word in that line might be you. It could be that you're the problem, not the idea. So as soon as you meet an opponent, stop talking to them. In fact, why don't you get some of these people who are basking in your adoration to go and talk to them instead? So these people talk to these people. And what they say, by the way, is not you should support Tracy's good idea, but actually they say, I'm supporting Tracy's idea because these are the benefits I'm getting. third-party endorsement of your idea through third-party benefits is where you need to be in change with opponents. And over time, once they work out those benefits are real and people are really getting, eventually they will want some. And they'll start to come on in the same direction as you want them to come. So, I don't want you to talk to them over. So this side, I'm just shut up, ignore them. So these people then, because they don't understand and they don't support. Absolutely, I want you to talk to these people and explain what you're doing, because these are your potential champions. And once they are champions, they go here, you stop talking to them. And if they are unfortunately opponents, they go here and you stop talking to them, so you can stop talking to them quite quickly. These people are positively dangerous. You see, they don't understand what you're doing, but they support it. These are the people who 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 months before whatever it is you're working on is about to go live, suddenly turn around in a meeting and go, "Oh my God, you can't possibly do that." And the whole thing judders to a halt and railway carriages come off lines and everything has to stop and people have to rethink. How on earth do you tell who they are? Actually, there are 2 ways of telling. One is physical, and it's when you're briefing people in and you see an excess of enthusiastic body language. Every time they look at you. I really like Tracy. I'm sure it's going to be good. And if I hang on for long enough, I might just understand 1 word in 10 she's talking about. But it's very good. Very good. And actually, that's the biggest clue. These people are a bit like Churchill in that they are nodding dogs. The other way you can tell them, of course, is when you get the surprising endorsement. You know, the person who says at the end of the meeting, "You know, that was really good. I'm absolutely supportive about that." And you think to yourself, "Phew, that was a conversation I wasn't going to look forward to." And you go the other direction. Mistake. Because your gut is probably right. Mary Sue hasn't spotted the fact that her department's going to Mumbai and she's going to be redundant. Now, in either of those circumstances, the excess of enthusiasm or the surprising supporter, you want to book a meeting and you want to go into this person really quickly. And what you do with these people is you talk a lot until you have spelt out the implications for them of change, which is a very un-British thing to do, because we really hope you've got the message between the lines and we haven't had to tell you you're leaving. I did actually go have a chief executive once who went to see somebody and he came back to my room, sat down, he said, "I think I've just had my appraisal and have I been fired?" "Yes, Crispin, you've been fired." You don't want to be there in change. You want everyone to be absolutely crystal clear. So, last thing. Why do people panic with change? This is a brain. What's really interesting about the brain is that this little bit in here has been with us for, it gets longer and longer. I think we're sort of over 100 and something thousand years now that little bit of brain has been an identifiable part of human beings. And this bit of brain, the rest of it, has been around a lot shorter and has developed over a lot shorter timescales. Now, I'm giving you this is quite an interesting bit of sort of developmental science and anthropology, but it's also really interesting to work out what those 2 bits of brain do. You see, this big bit of brain over here is what makes Homo sapiens, and is the rational, logical, inventive brain that has created the sort of species advantage that's happened over the past 20, 10, 20, 30,000 years. This bit of the brain, which came with us via Neanderthals and all the rest of it, that's the bit that's the emotional bit. So here I am with my change idea, and we'll call it a baby. We're going to call it a baby after something my wife did, slightly unfortunate in the hearing of someone concerned, when I was running a very large organisation. And it was a sort of organisation when people brought their babies in to show. And do people bring babies into work and show you? And you have to smile, don't you? And my wife didn't on one occasion. She somewhat, unfortunately, left the room with the words in Glaswegian ringing out. She says, "That's one fucking pug ugly baby." She said she was going to get you a mug with the baby's picture on. And I said, really? God, but pug ugly baby. Now, actually, this is your idea, and it's my idea. I'm just showing it to you. And what you can see is one pug ugly baby. I think it's beautiful, because it's mine. You see? And you're going, it's awful. It's awful. Drop the baby. Walk away from the baby now. It's got green eyes and yellow teeth. Get rid of it. And what's happened in that reaction is that this has totally overpowered that. Come on, somebody, give us the biochemistry of what happens when you see something frightening. What happens? What hormone gets released? Adrenaline. What does adrenaline do? Well, but it does something very particular with the blood supply. What does it do with the blood supply? To which parts? Muscle. It goes into muscle. Why? Why does it go into muscle? Because 40, 50, 60, 70,000 years ago, when we only had two job descriptions, right, hunter-gatherer, cooker and provider, these two things, and you're going around hunter-gatherer, 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 this is my job, wonderful hunter-gatherer, and the earth starts to move like this, what happens? Right? Who are we descended from? The people who like that, or the people who went up and said, gosh, what a fabulous set of teeth that dinosaur's got? We are descended from the people who learnt to run away. And to run away really well and really fast, you need blood in your muscles, and you don't need to think. And that's why you get pug ugly baby reaction. It's because people have stopped thinking past the first phrase, I'm going to be making some changes. And off we go. So, if you think about stakeholders' reactions to you, I've been given an extra 5, I promise. Yes. Here's a way of avoiding stakeholder fright. Call the 4 L's. Language, length, links, and liabilities. What language do they speak and what language are you speaking? And if you're speaking functional language and they're speaking practice language or professional language, you're not going to understand each other. So put it in the language of the people you're talking to. Length. How long have I got? Well, as long as the agenda says. How long is their attention span? Probably about 10% of that at best. So never fill up the time. Or get the really important things out of the front and expect to have the last 10 slides cut off. Links. What's important to them collectively, individually? Link what you're doing to what's important to them. Don't expect they'll see it. They won't, because they'll have had probably 8 presentations already by the time you come on, and they'll just be presentation blind. And finally, liabilities. What are they worried about? How do I show them I've spotted what they worry about and what my proposal does to help reduce their worry? So those 4 L's. Those are something you could think about constantly with stakeholders. So we're back with the contact sport, and I'm going to tell you a story to finish and share one last thought. Decisions, we've talked about values. Values inform those decisions. So how do you think about your own values, particularly at a time of immense stress and strain, where potentially, as we know, there are public service stories and private sector stories that show that however well-intentioned people are, they can absolutely do and say the wrong thing and make the wrong decisions at critical times. So I employed, once in Diageo and once in Cadbury Schweppes, a literal and metaphorical young Turk, and his name was Tariq. And Tariq came to the Cadbury Schweppes Christmas party in London in December 2002. And he took some friends home afterwards in the evening. And he went off to do a party trick, which was to disappear and jump through the skylight of his kitchen and surprise them all. Except he didn't make it. And Tariq was discovered having shimmied up 30 foot up a drain pipe. The drain pipe had sheared off and had fallen into the garden, and he broke his neck and died. 32. Only child of parents in southern Turkey in Bodrum. His father's brother's only son had been killed aged 21 the year before. You couldn't write it. 3 months later, his father came, his mother, his family came to London, and we had a huge celebration of Tariq's life. And his father stood up and he said, "I can't talk about my son, but I can read you what he left on his laptop." And with the body and other personal effects, we'd sent back his work laptop and everything. We'd no idea what was on there. And he found this. And it was called My DNA. And what Tariq had done, had written 6 lines that described him to a T. And I'll tell you 3 of them. One was, be there for people who have no one to stand up for them. And Tariq was forever in my office, pointing out some injustice or other that needed to be put right because it was a breach of our values, it was a breach of natural justice, whatever. He was absolutely the champion of people who would otherwise have been treated pretty badly by the system. The second thing was, be there for people who are there for you. And I remember an amazing story. He always wore a flappy raincoat. And Gail and I couldn't get out one night. The babysitter got ill, and there was a huge do going on. And we worked in London and lived in Oxford, which is about 50 miles. And I got home, and we still hadn't got anywhere. And I'd had a text halfway through my journey, "Have you got somewhere?" No. And literally half an hour behind me was Tariq and his girlfriend with a packed bag, and they turned up to babysit so we could go out. That's an extraordinary thing to do. And then the final thing he said was, say sorry. And what he meant by that was when he didn't live up to one of those 6 other things, he wanted to make it important enough that he went and apologised to someone where he hadn't done the right thing. And Tariq was forever saying sorry to people, because we're not perfect. And I have one final thought for you, which is this, which is if you were going to do one thing on your way back from this summer school, in the middle of the sorts of pressures you're under and the decisions you have to make, it's actually ask yourself, if someone read something out about me, what would be the 5 or 6 things I want them to read and for everybody in that room to say, yeah, that's them, to a T. They did all of that. One final thought on values. I'm going to leave you the words with my favourite modern philosopher, who's a man called Albus Dumbledore. And at the end of the second Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Harry discovers he has the same skills or capabilities, if you like, as Voldemort, who, as you know, is the villain of the piece. And it's Dumbledore, Harry's headmaster, who turns around and says this to him. "It's our choices, Harry, that shows what we truly are, far more than our abilities." I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.